Start my timer so I don't go beyond the 20 minutes I said I would. Okay, everybody, so picking up where we left off yesterday, if we scroll down our page to right here under remote learning assignments, this tutorial, I'm going to open up that document which gives instructions on how to do the tutorial. But at the same time, I'm also going to open up this PDF of all the code. It is also instructions, but it doesn't include pictures. It's just the code itself. So this is an easy one, this PDF, for me to use to copy and paste the code from. Because again, if you're not typing this code, it might be nice to be able to just copy, paste it, and then clean it up and put it to work in your example. It's not, I realize not all of you are the best, I'm not a great typist, so it helps with that. Now remember, if you don't want to follow the video I'm recording now, live or later, you can also access this video right here, which is a full video of me doing the entire tutorial in a 1 hour span, okay? And you can pause it and use it for whatever sort of purpose. But let's pick up where we left off yesterday. So I'm going to open up the PDF. This is the PDF of just the code. And we did get some of this code in there yesterday. So for example, we got this comment in there yesterday. And this is the PDF or the instructions for this tutorial. And we did this first page like we did. We created this design and then we added in this code. All right, here is our program from yesterday. Here is the design. If I hit start, this design should in fact run. It just won't do anything at this point. Does your design have to look exactly like this? No, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. It is a tutorial, so it doesn't have to have the exact same fonts and colors. You can change it up a little bit. It is a tutorial for marks though, so you don't want to change it so much that it doesn't look like the tutorial. Otherwise, how do I mark yours versus somebody else's? So just keep that in mind. But at this point, with my Visual Studio project made, my Visual Studio project saved, and if I hit play, and I'm delaying a little bit, waiting for it to come up, I should be able to see my design appear on the screen just to make sure that I can do that. This is stuff we've been doing for the last couple of units. So all the way back to Unit 2, we were making designs and running them. We were naming objects. We were starting to put in a little bit of code. Then by the variables unit, we were adding more code. We were creating these things called variables with our code, which allows our programs to remember stuff. Then in the unit we've been working on during remote learning, we've been adding these things called conditional statements, which allows our code to make decisions and decide whether one thing should happen or another thing should happen. And a lot of you are most likely still working on those assignments, okay? And keep in mind, I'm still delaying because this thing is taking forever to run. Keep in mind that these assignments are set up sequentially. So they move up one to the next. It's not really a great idea to jump around from the assignments. You kind of want to work on them each one after the other so that they kind of make more sense. Because otherwise you're gonna encounter stuff in that assignment that you haven't encountered before. Yet if you'd done the earlier assignments, then maybe you would have seen at least part of that. Okay, there it is. There's my design. Woo, finally. All right, so I'm going to stop that, and now I'm going to jump to the code where we left off yesterday. And really, all we did yesterday was we added this comment, and we started to add this thing called a global variable. Now, as you go and copy and paste the code in, it's important to know where you're pasting it. So, for example, when I pasted in this global variable, I had to know exactly where it went. Under the words public partial class, underneath that opening bracket. If you had done our unit on variables, you would have experienced this before. Even if you had just done the examples in the variables unit, you would have known where a global variable goes. But if you hadn't, you may have accidentally put, for example, this line of code, say up here. And that's the wrong place to put it, okay? Or maybe you put this line of code, lines of code, if you count the comments, right here, which is also a wrong place to put it and would cause errors and would eventually make a mistake. Like you can see down here, it's causing mistakes. So it's important to realize exactly where you're putting the code makes a difference. Can I help you to debug that code later? Of course I can, but just keep that in mind that it's important you know where you're putting it. Okay. On with the tutorial now. Boy, my computer is very sluggish this morning. All right, so the next thing after this global variable was we're going to add code to this place called Formload. In this case, I'd name my form. So how do I get to Formload? You find your form. You find an empty spot somewhere on your form. Be careful you're not double clicking a button or something else. I usually recommend you double click somewhere like this lower corner area here, where you know there's not going to be anything other than the form itself. Double click it, and it will take you to the code called Formload. This is also a tip I've been saying since we started coding. Give yourself some extra space here between the two curly brackets. One of the earliest mistakes I ever see a student when they're coding is they accidentally put the code outside the curly brackets, which ends up breaking stuff. So don't do that, okay? Go make sure you're in between the two curly brackets. Give yourself a little extra space. All right, so I'm going to now grab this line of code right off that PDF. And if you don't want to grab it, you can type it. You can type int number equals max. Do you need the comment? Not necessarily. I can't give you 100 on this project if you don't do the comments, but I can give you like a 70 or even a high 80 on this project if you just have the code and a few comments. But the good news is you don't have to type any of this. You can select it right off the PDF. Now, sometimes it's tricky, so I'm going to give you a tip. A tip for selecting code off the PDF. If it doesn't seem to grab it when you first click and drag, try double clicking one of the words first. First, double click a word, then try to click and drag. Once you have that code selected, then you can copy it. Then you can go over here and you can paste it. Okay? So what have we pasted in there? We've made a variable that's going to keep track of how many prizes this person's going to want to collect in this game. We start off at 100 prizes. We're going to assume that they're going to want to chase 100 prizes. They may not. They may want a smaller number, but we're going to assume that they're going to start at the maximum number, which is 100 prizes. The next thing we're going to do, and I'm just going to grab the comment alone, we're going to now make something called a loop, okay? Now, a loop is something you haven't seen before in this course because this is the unit that this tutorial is covering. So a loop is essentially like an if statement. So you already know that an if statement looks like this. It has the word if, it has a set of round brackets, and it has a set of curly brackets. And then inside of these round brackets is some kind of a test. Some kind of code you write that tests if something is true or false. And if it's true, then it runs whatever code is in between these two curly brackets right here. And if it's false, it skips all the way past all that code right there. That's what an if statement does. We just learned that over the last 2.5 weeks. It's a conditional statement that does that. So a loop is basically like this. Oops. Back. A loop also has round brackets. It also has curly brackets. So it looks like an if statement, but instead of the word if right here, we're going to put the word while. So it's going to look like this for the most part. However, those round brackets are not going to stay empty. But in a lot of ways, if I just change this to the word if, it would be an if statement. It's that simple. But by adding the word while there, it's now transformed into something called a loop. What's the difference? Well, it works exactly like an if statement, but with an if statement, it'll do this code right here, and then it'll just move on and do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But with a loop, when it's done this code right here, it goes back up to the top right here and does it again. and it checks it, and it's like, oh, it's true. So now go and do this again. Now check it, go back and do it again. So what you're creating here is this circle, or this essentially a loop, running multiple times. And that's really important when we're dealing with machines. Whether you're in power mechanics or in woods or even in hairstyling, that's what machines do. Whether it's a hairdryer or a car engine or a circular saw, they keep doing the same thing over and over again. They're machines. They like to do a repetitive action. So what we're doing is creating in our code's ability to keep doing an action over and over and over again until we tell it to stop. So that's what a loop basically is. Now, you can see you could literally copy that right out of the PDF, but I'm just going to type it. While number is greater than 0 is the way I'm going to structure this loop. So while this number is, well, which is right now set to 100, because that's what the max is, while it's greater than 0, well, 100 is certainly greater than 0, it's going to keep doing stuff in here. Whatever stuff I tell it to do, it's going to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again until the number is no longer less than 0. Pardon me, greater than 0. What you want to do inside the loop is really just 2 lines of code. Okay, just 2 lines. So if you want, you can copy those lines right off of the PDF. I'm copying them with their comments. I'm going to paste them right into the code right there. Okay. Now remember, you don't actually need the comments. So if you're a little confused by the comments, here you can see that exact same code without the comments. It's just 2 lines of code. But what the comments will do is it will explain what these lines do. Okay, this one is actually not that tough to explain. This one is a little trickier. But let me put the comments back in. Okay, first line adds this number to our combo box. Combo box is this thing in our design. It's not a text box, it's this thing called a combo box. So it's going to put the number into the box. This line of code, as it says, decreases, using the shorthand, the number variable by 1. It's the same as writing a line of code that looks like this. Number equals number minus 1. I'm taking 1 away. So the next time it goes through the loop, now the number is 99, then 98, then 97, then 96, etc. Now there's one more line that we want to use in this, and it's on the second page right here before we test this thing. I'm going to also use this line, copy it, but you'll notice this line happens after that closing bracket, and that's important. So I want to show you on the screen here that this line of code, goes right there. It goes after that closing bracket. And this is again where the indents can really help you to see how the code all comes together. Now, temporarily, I'm just going to remove all of this code. This is all the code we've worked with today, since we've started this tutorial today. When I ran this code before we started today, this is how our design looked. In a second, you'll see it. I'll take a sip. There we go. So you can see here, this is empty, this is empty, this is empty, right? Everything's empty. There's nothing in this. It's empty. Now with the code back, code we just finished, I'm going to run it again. This time you'll notice there's a 100 sitting there. So it's added something to that combo box. It's put a number in there, but not just that number. 100 numbers have been added to the combo box. From 1 all the way to 100 have been added to that combo box. So what I was able to use the loop to do was, I didn't want to do that with the designer. I didn't want to go into the designer and type in 100 numbers. What a waste of my time. I didn't want to do that. So I can use the loop to automate that task and just have it do it over and over and over again. Now, don't do this to your example, but I'm going to actually add another 0 up here to max. I'm going to turn the max up to 1,000. Don't do that to yours. I'm just doing that to show you what it could do potentially. Now you'll see it's the number 1000, and it's actually added 1,000 numbers into this thing. Or what if I took a 0 away and just made it 10? Same thing. It's now going to loop 10 times. Not 1,000 times, not 100 times, but it's going to loop 10 times and put 10 numbers into the combo box. So this thing called a loop is actually a very useful programming tool because it can get it to do the code over and over and over again. Okay? Just like an if statement allows you to make decisions, a loop allows you to run your code multiple times over and over and over again. Okay, we got 4 minutes left in today's tutorial. So what would be next is to now start coding this button called create. Now, I will warn you that there's quite a bit of code that's going to go into that create button. Okay, it starts here on this page and finishes just before the bottom of the page. So you might have an instinct to take all of it, just to take all the code that starts here and ends here. And actually, let me back up a bit so you can kind of see that. That is possible, right? I could grab all the code that started at the beginning of the create button and select all the code from the beginning of create, from that opening bracket, all the way down to that closing bracket. But you got to be careful. The brackets matter. So you got to make sure you're selecting this stuff properly. So I might not recommend grabbing all of it at once. Instead, maybe you just want to grab a line or two at a time as you go through this. Okay? But I'm going to copy. So I'm going to do it the way I just suggested. I'm going to go a little bit at a time. I'm going to start with, oops, this line right here. Copy. Now I got to get to the create button. So I'm going to go back to my design. I'm going to double click the create button. I'm going to paste that line in there. It says it clears out the list box. Okay. Good. Because who knows if I want to do this more than once. Now I'm going to do this line, create a random number generator. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that. If you've been working in the conditional statements unit, you'll know that by the time you get to the last programming problem, you're going to be working with random numbers. That makes things a little more interesting. All right, now I'm going to do this line. And again, if I don't want to, I don't have to take the comment with it. I could just take the line of code. So this says whatever the user selected in the combo box. So if they chose to do 100 numbers or 5 numbers, I'm going to convert it to a variable called amount. We've seen this code before as well since our variables unit started. Okay, 2 minutes left. Now I've got a big comment here about something called the for loop. So this loop you saw before called the while loop is one type of loop. The second type of loop is called the for loop. It's more so used for counting, and it's a much more complicated loop. It has a different structure than the while loop. It is definitely, as it says here, more technical to write. But I do give you a little tip for it. If you wanted, if you were someone who was actually typing the for loop, then what I would suggest you do is you type FOR, okay, and then press your tab key twice, and it will actually finish the for loop for you. You can see that's what this tip says right here. So again, if you're experimenting with for loops, that would be a piece of advice I'd give you for working in Visual Studio. But instead of that, what I would recommend is maybe grab all this code all the way up to from the start of the for loop to just below the bottom of this first page. Just make sure you're not copying that last closing curly bracket. Don't copy that one. Okay? So I started up here. Whoops, I started too high. I started right here at the start of the for loop. And I selected all that code down to, but not including that last bracket. Copy. And luckily, it just brings that code in for me nicely. There it is, with the comments, which is really handy. You might even want to space it out a little bit. Doesn't always do a perfect job with it, but there it is. It really didn't require a lot of work for me. You can hear my alarm ticking down in the background. So just before we wrap up today and I turn off the video, let's test this code. Tomorrow, I'm going to go through a little few of the details of it, but let's just see what that code just did for our tutorial. So I want to collect 100 prizes. Let's create 100 unique prizes. And by using the number 100, it starts getting to work over and over and over again, creating 100 random numbers in a random order. What it makes sure that happens is no two numbers are repeated. So you can see here, one of the numbers it chose was 115. At no other point in this list will be the number 115. It only appears once in the list. Then it chose 137. And at no place else in the list would it be 137. Now, let me show you that with a much smaller number, so it might be easier to digest. I'll just go with 10 numbers this time. And you can see it worked it a lot quicker. So from 8 to 59, it chose 10 random numbers, and no two could be the same. And that was all accomplished with the loop. Tomorrow, I'll go through a few of the details on how it did that, but it was pretty easy to get it working. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now. It's 2:35.